Very cool. I'm seeing some people roll in here. Thanks for coming, folks. While we're waiting for a couple of people to trickle in, just to kick us off, my name is Sung. I'm a solutions engineer, and I'll let Leo introduce himself real quick before I do some housekeeping announcements.
Hi there. I'm Leo. I'm a solution engineer as well at Datafold. Great to have you all here. Um,
Yeah,
and welcome.
yeah, very cool. And so we're gonna have a pretty packed house today. Pretty ecstatic about that. Um, we're really here, to listen to you folks and show you something that will, I think, solve some pretty compelling problems to you, just because we've lived and breathed a lot of the data engineer, analytics engineer shoes when it comes to migrations, when it comes to just transformation validation. And so if those kind of areas of problem space matter to you, they matter to us, and we're going to have a fun time here as a result. And so, yeah, pretty excited. Just to let you know the mechanics of how this is all going to go down. Leo here is going to drive the demo primarily live, and I will be the chat moderator. And so, however you want to interact with us, I'll make sure to keep a close eye on the chat and answer in chat, or using my judgment, interrupt Leo live just to give a live answer if we see that as more valuable to the group in order to answer that question. And so with that in mind, we'll give it one more minute, and then Leo, you can take us away from there. All right?
Beautiful. Thank you, sir. All right. So as we're waiting for people to trickle in, I think there's been a good amount of trickling in already. So I think I'm just going to kick this off. So if you don't mind, I'm going to not be in like official Google Slides presentation mode because I will be hopping between a few things. This is going to be very interactive and hopefully give you a really good sense for how things work at Datafold. So great, let's begin. Welcome again. My name's Leo, and I'll walk through a little agenda for today. Zip through some intros since you all kind of got a sense of who we are already, and then we'll jump into it. So what we'll be covering at today's Cloud Demo Day, we'll focus on two main topics. One has been kind of our bread and butter for a while now, which is supporting data testing in CI for your SQL transformation code. And sorry, I'm battling a bit of a cold. So that will be something that you that will be something that you want to do to validate that your SQL transformation pipeline doesn't have any errors introduced as you're iterating on and developing. We'll also be touching on something we're really excited about, a recent launch, a 3-in-1 migration toolkit to validate that your migration has been successful and to allow you and your team to put a stamp on it, declare that it's complete, that you can shut down the legacy database and move on to the new one. And there are three legs to that stool, which are column level lineage, a SQL translator tool, and cross database diffing. Okay, I think I'm good. Let's move on. If I need to call on backup, I know who to call, but I think I'm okay. I'm Leo. I've worked at these companies as a data practitioner, and I'm just really excited to be at Datafold because data diffing, which we're going to get into in just a minute, is to me just a critical part of how to make a data migration, how to make an effective data team work, how to get your CI to really catch errors when you have critical errors that could break dashboards, data-driven products, etc. And of course, you heard from Sung, who will be in the chat, and also in the DBT community Slack, if that's where you hang out. I'm there as well. Please reach out with your questions about the product or your anything on your mind related to data. Okay, so enough preamble. This is a data diff. I feel really strongly that a data diff is something that you can't do without as a data practitioner. Every day we look at code diffs. Everyone uses GitHub. For a software engineer, GitHub and a Git diff tells you exactly what the differences are between your code, so you can make sure not to merge bad code. For a data practitioner, it's a little different because you could have a very small change in your SQL code or any code have a very large impact on your data. And so this concept of a data diff, it's old, but Datafold is the only company I know of that is really all in on data diffing to make sure that you are able to maintain data quality and not introduce errors in production. And so we'll get a little bit more into how this works, how you can use this tool to see these errors even before they hit production, or in the context of a migration, to be absolutely confident that your old system matches your new system on an individual value level. So I'm going to start by walking through this transformation validation workflow. We also call this deployment testing. Data diffing before you merge SQL code, comparing staging data to production data. And so this is fully integrated within your GitHub user experience, and I'll show you that right now. I'll show you that in 1 second, because I do have a couple other things I just want to talk about as far as like where this fits in. These are some quotes. We made them up, but hopefully they resonate with you. My numbers don't match up. My CFO's doesn't trust me, whatever it may be. The board needs the numbers to match last month's meeting. My data-driven product is broken. You get the idea. You know what? Let me just jump right into GitHub, because I don't want to hold back on any of this. This is not about slides; it's about the product, and I'll get to some of those slides in a little bit. So basically, I'm dropping you into a GitHub pull request where you've got changes to your SQL code. This happens to be DBT, but this might be SQL code that's managed in Airflow or any other orchestrator. And these all look like fairly innocent changes. Not too many lines of code to evaluate, so you should be able to read this, but hopefully you're already getting the sense that so much is abstracted away by this git diff. It's a code diff. It doesn't tell you really anything about the data. You have to, your mind has to do all that work, or you have to do a lot of SQL query writing to compare production data to staging data. So what Datafold does is it writes a handy little comment in the pull request that shows you a row count difference, any primary keys that exist in one table but not the other. This is an important little point. You could have a row count difference, but the primary keys wouldn't actually represent that difference, because there could be duplicate primary keys, which we would also catch at this point. But the real magic, because you can check for duplicate primary keys and you can check for row count difference with a variety of tools, but what you don't get outside of Datafold is this value level comparison that tells you exactly where the differences are, where the impact on the data will be based on your code changes. And so if you look at this, you can see we've got, I'm going to open this details tab because we'll get to that in a second. We've got 2 columns with data differences, created at and subplan. And that might be enough. Like, you might not ever need to use the GitHub interface to say, oh, like, I didn't mean to have this type of impact on subplan. And so I want to go back to my code, maybe make a change. And then the process starts over, Datafold and CI runs again. And hopefully at some point you or your colleague who's reviewing your PR will have a good sense for what the true impact is of your code changes. But you might also not know for sure that is the impact you want to see. And so you can click on that View Details button right there and see a much richer summary of the impact. So this overview tab basically shows you what we saw in GitHub, and I'll get to Looker and other BI tools in a moment that might be of interest. But this Values tab, which I kind of started with, this is what helps you really dig in and say, okay, I think that % difference is okay, but I want to see some examples. And you can even get a look at kind of a third angle of this by analyzing the distribution difference. So I like to highlight these two. Some of those, all the values are different. The chart doesn't show you too much, but this can be really quick to get to the information that matters here. you can look at all those timestamp changes and say, there are a lot of timestamp changes, but what's really happening here? You might want to look at a summary or a distribution shift. You can see a similar insight here. If we'll go back to the values tab in a moment, but we saw a lot of shifts between team, individual, business. But here you can see, let's see, this is B is the staging data, that PR schema. So in B, you can see all of these individual values with the individual category. They didn't exist in production. So you know that this business is shifting to individual, team is shifting to individual. So I want to highlight one more thing about this before I move on from the values tab. You can tell I'm really excited about value level differences. Why couldn't you catch this with, let's say, a DBT test? Well, if we look at the timestamp column, the values are valid. They are within a reasonable range. So they're not null. So all those tests would pass. And so it's almost like a false confidence if all your DBT tests pass, but there's actually a lot of data changing and you just see check, 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 right? Without Datafold, you wouldn't have insight into actually how the data is changing or if it's changing at all. Similarly, over here, you see all the values are individual, business, or team, right? There's some nulls as well. But that would pass an accepted values test, assuming you had those values in there, but you would have no insight into how the value data is shifting around. So we just want people to have this at their fingertips automatically before they hit merge, so that any issues that do exist aren't discovered by a business stakeholder, by a customer, by breaking the product, or just as critically, maybe you don't have any data issues at all because your team does a phenomenal job of testing and no one is ever asleep at the wheel. But that's a ton of time and a ton of effort. So we're hoping that this can either save you time invested in data testing or just level up your data testing. Let's see. So as mentioned, I'll rely on Sung to jump in if there are any questions in the chat. Otherwise, I'll just kind of keep going. So let's go back to that Looker point I mentioned. So we have also found that teams are really relying on us to help them identify any impacts on downstream BI assets. So I've got Looker on the demo today, but we've been shipping like crazy other BI tools. So Tableau is now available as a downstream BI tool that can connect to your warehouse and Datafold, and I'll show you exactly what that looks like here. So basically, what I did is I clicked on Looker from that Dependencies tab. And what this shows me is that Fact Monthly Financials streams into Looker. So basically, you can see on the column level, this happens to be all the columns. I can find another slightly more interesting example where not all the columns are selected. But the point here is that you might have a lot of assets in Looker, and it's not always clear to you, or in Tableau, or in Power BI, or in Mode, High Touch, and it's not always clear to you what matters, but at least with Datafold, you'll be able to see both in the UI and also over here in the pull request, what is dependent on the models or the SQL files that you are editing. So that's kind of the first glimpse at our lineage tool, which I'm going to dig into a bit more when we move to the second section of this presentation, and I'll talk about our migration toolkit. The last thing I want to highlight as far as CI, Datafold and CI, is that we do also diff the downstreams. So I'll show you what that means. So here's another view of lineage. Let me zoom a little bit. So in this PR, we've modified DimOrgs and SalesSync, I believe. And so you can see here, those two tables have a lot of downstreams. And So some of them are Looker, or some of them are BI assets, which you can see here. Some of them are other tables, in this case in Snowflake, but we also support a variety of other data warehouses, just to be clear: Redshift, Databricks, Postgres, BigQuery. And then on the migrations front, which we'll get to in a moment, Oracle, SQL Server, MySQL, and others being shipped as we speak. So that is just like zooming out on these tables that we were editing. And as those of you, especially those of you who use dbt or Airflow, are aware, let me get back to this. Downstreams could be impacted. Sometimes that's actually not totally clear to people. Why would we diff downstreams if the code hasn't been edited? So I'll explain it and then I'll show you. If you have, let's say, a where clause in a downstream table that depends on a column from an upstream table, then the data for that downstream table could be impacted even if the code is not impacted. So you want to know how your code impacts. Your code is going to impact both your modified models, your modified SQL code, as well as your downstreams. And indeed, you can see here, these are downstream tables. So fact monthly financials, sounds important. Fact yearly financials. And you can see the row count has changed. The values have changed. Let's actually just look at those, see what those changes look like. So hopefully I'm giving you a sense that this is legitimately a different type of data testing that really catches stuff that in an efficient way, right in your workflow, that you're going to want to see before merging code. So here are the columns with differing values. Again, the code for this table was not touched, and the value differences are small, but perhaps quite significant to the board or the CFO. Oh, actually, that's a little bigger than I was initially read that as. Yeah, 2790 versus 2292. So a big difference there. Big difference in subscriber count. And if you look at this primary keys tab, and by the way, that does not have to be a technical primary key. We are referring to primary keys as a column or a combination of columns that will represent a unique row. So just in case that was a question. And this primary key, this primary key is missing in the PR branch. Yep, PR monthly financials. So what that means basically is if you merge that code to this upstream model or upstream SQL, then this entire month of financials would disappear from the financial table that's used by maybe someone important. So that's just my little spiel on downstreams and why we diff them. We do also have options in our CI config so that you can only diff important downstreams. I won't walk through all the ins and outs of that today, but we do have some customers who have hundreds, thousands of SQL tables that are part of this giant DAG, and they it's not scalable or fast or really necessary to diff all those tables. Some of them aren't even ones that anyone uses or looks at, and so we have some configuration where you can tag the ones that matter so that when they are downstream, they are diffed. So just a quick note on that. We have a lot of other configurable options along those lines. All right, so to wrap up this section, I'll just run through a couple of the points that I like to frame this as. You want to find problems before your business user does. And the data quality testing tools, at least that I'm aware of, that are out there, simply do not catch some of these problems. The data space industry practice, I think, has evolved very quickly over the last few years. As we all know, data has grown to a scale where careful analysis of every single cell is not possible. But we don't want to lose the rigor, at least where possible. We want to maintain the rigor of being able to really understand how our actions as data practitioners are going to impact the numbers. It's the worst feeling for me as a data practitioner if I'm doing stuff with the data and I don't totally understand what it is. So we want to make sure You get your time back, that you don't find yourself fighting fires constantly. I'm in Oregon, so I don't like fires. We have forest fires here every August. And we don't want your team or you to feel like or it legitimately be blocking important business processes and losing trust. This is how I like to think of it. With Datafold, you can get to work again. And with that, I'm gonna jump into a little overview of our 3-in-1 toolkit for faster data migrations. So this is, I encourage you to maybe take a breath, take a sip of your coffee. I'm gonna indulge myself in a sip of this tea, or indulge in, I never know what the right word is there. And um, allow your headspace to clear slightly from all that talk of GitHub diffing, CI, transformation validation. And let me actually take us in a travel through time back to this slide, which is going to form, again, kind of the foundation of everything we do at Datafold, a data diff. CI, as I mentioned, has been our bread and butter. In a sense, it's where we got a lot of traction. Most of our customers are using it, but we have found that that is not the only place for data diffing to transform workflows, and that in addition to that, so many of you out there in the data space are undergoing migrations, and migrations are hard. So I actually took this slide that we had been using with these little quotes. These are real, these are real sentiments. I hope this resonates. Invented quotes from what we're hearing out there when people come to us and say, my migration is dragging on. It's over budget. It's overdue. Like, I have to do something about this. What we want to prevent is a situation where that dragging on leads to no one ever trusting the new system. And then they keep building stuff on the old system. And I always, I don't know if there's like a direct quote here or a direct meme that's floating around, but the nightmare in my mind of any data migration is that by the time you're almost done with the data migration, the technology has changed and you have to start your next data migration. So obviously, none of us want to be in that situation. It sounds like a nightmare. And the third quote is just alluding to this fundamental challenge with data migrations. The numbers have to match. Otherwise, all the other problems that I was just mentioning are going to get you. Okay, so 3-in-1 toolkit. I'm going to flip back to this slide because I don't think I write this explicitly anywhere else. What are those 3 tools? Column level lineage, and that is for understanding your data, identifying what you really need to migrate, understanding what the dependencies are, both in your old system and your new. SQL translation between dialects. So you could move all the data and you could validate that it moved effectively and that it all matches, but right away, it's almost like yesterday, you have to make sure that your SQL is going to generate transformed data that matches. And so to translate your SQL dialects en masse is no simple task. And finally, cross-database diffing, which to me is kind of the gold standard of being able to make sure that your data in your old system really does match your new. So let me zoom back to the present of my slides. And I'm going to start with column level lineage. Not so much because you already got a glimpse of it, but because I see this as kind of the beginning of a data migration. Being able to understand which columns are used at all, which columns are used by downstream tables, and what the shape of your data is, and what maybe is like a floating part of your DAG, whether that's an individual node or a group of nodes that's used by some team that may or may not need it still. So there's just, I see it as fundamentally a data governance activity. And so our vision here is that, and what we're seeing people doing is using this tooling to just make sure that they fully understand their old data and their new, so that then they can validate that it all matches and declare their migration, initially ready to begin and eventually ready to be declared complete. So I'm just going to pull up that same table that we were looking at before and walk up and down the DAG a bit. A new version of Datafold is ready. Seems like the engineers have built something. Okay, so I'll let this reload. Great. Yeah, so let's spend a little bit more time on this. So you can see here, this is DimOrgs. This is the table that we were editing the code of earlier. Basically, with column level lineage, you can see all the upstream tables, all the downstreams at various depths. So right now, this is at a depth of 1. We have it set up like this because it's column level. So like unlike a table level DAG that you're probably used to seeing, it will get very messy if you show the entire DAG with all the column edges at once. So the idea here would be that you might find a table that you're interested in, and you could even select a column and see, so this column is depended on by a lot, but this one is depended on by nothing. I think this one is depended on by one of the columns in DimOrg. So you can kind of get the idea where this might help you understand the relationship between all these tables. I'm going to keep navigating, and this is going to take us into the BI land. So I already talked a bit about this. I won't dwell on it too much, but hopefully you get the idea, some of the value here. I also want to communicate how you can actually look at a lot more than just the table and the columns and like the data types. This is built actually by parsing your SQL query logs that were used to build the tables in the first place. So that plus the APIs for the respective BI tools. But if we're just talking about the warehouse, I actually found myself debugging using this a few days ago when something didn't look quite right in one of our Looker dashboards. And I said, okay, well, what does this tie to? Right? I can find, in this case, it was a DBT table that was fed into the dashboard. And I could actually get enough detail that I could look at the SQL of it. And then I said, if something doesn't look quite right about the SQL, I could just copy it to a clipboard, hop over to my data warehouse, and it just got me right to the source. And so that might be something that you end up using in your daily life as a data practitioner, but it could also be, hopefully you're seeing how this would be really important to have just some ground truth as you kick off your data migration and you understand which of these nodes are ones that you actually need to migrate. So yeah, just to orient this whole discussion around lineage on that point, I think the main benefit here for your migration is that you can figure out what's important, what's popular, and what needs to migrate. On that note, you can take a look at, I think this is going to be underwhelming because it's our demo instance, but let's see if I can find an example. I don't think I have an example right now, but basically you can see the number of the specific users as well as the number of times those users have viewed the table in these usage details, as well as a profile of the table here. So the distribution of all the columns, any descriptions you may have added, the SQL query again, as we saw earlier. Okay, so that is a little bit about our lineage tool. Definitely happy to answer more questions. That is leg one of our three-legged stool of our 3-in-1 migration toolkit. Jumping back to our slide deck. Yes, Google Translate for SQL. Leg number 2 of our migration toolkit. So as I mentioned before, you move all your data You validate that it matches. We'll get to that in a moment. That's the cross-database diffing. That's hopefully the pretty exciting part of this presentation. But before we get there, we've got something else that we're really happy with, which is our SQL translator. So this is a tool that basically lets you take all of your scripts, your stored procedures, your 1,000-line queries, whatever it may be. In this case, I'm going to show you an example of translating from SQL Server to Snowflake. I've got a query prepared right here. I don't write SQL Server every day. And you can see here, let's see. So you can see here this cast from convert. So there's a few things in here. And hopefully that quick little demo gives you a sense for how this could be an important piece of your migration. You have data in your old warehouse, but you also have a lot of code. And this kind of harkens back to the discussion before about, well, we're data practitioners, but we also do reload. We also do work in code, and that is something that we have to think about equally and kind of manage in sync as we proceed with the migration. Okay. Finally, I will jump into data diff for validating source to target. So again, do a little bit more detail here, and then also walk through a quick demo. So as you can see here, you've got your source, you've got your target, you've got your raw data and your derived data in both, and then your orchestrators, so DBT, Airflow, etc. Data diff has a couple of important roles here. I'll start with validating source to target. You want to make a direct comparison between both your raw data and your derived data to make sure that it matches exactly on a row level. So you can see a few of the databases that we support today, and we've got more in the pipe. We aim to support essentially everything, and we're trying to follow the market and do what is most popular in that order. So this is where we're at. And if there's something that you are looking to diff that we don't support, please do let us know. We need that feedback. So before I move on, I just want to touch on, actually, no, I think I'll move on here. Yeah, so you can see that cross-database diffing that I just highlighted. You can also use kind of this same functionality to diff within your database if there's any data that you've copied over and you just want to do like a comparison within Snowflake, within Databricks, etc. Data diff is super scalable. I want to emphasize like what we're doing here and why this is possible. So you may have written a SQL query to compare two data tables, and that might have involved like a fancy join or something along those lines within your data warehouse. To compare between data systems, even if it's within two of the same database types, but if they're different connections, let alone if you're comparing SQL Server to Databricks or Oracle to Snowflake or something like that, you can't write SQL to do that. Actually, I'll say you could write SQL to do that, but in order to do that, you'd have to move the data to one of the databases or the other. So really, you can't write SQL to do that. So how are we doing this? Well, we've gained this efficiency that you're seeing on the screen by essentially taking hashes of the tables in each data warehouse or each database. What that lets us do is essentially see if the hashes match. So we don't have to move all the data, we just have to compare the hashes. If they don't match, we know there's a difference. If there's a difference, we take a hash of a smaller section of the data, see if that matches, and so on until we're able to isolate all the differences based on common primary keys. So a lot more technical detail we could share. Reach out, happy to kind of talk through all of that. But the result, hopefully that gives you enough to get a sense to kind of believe why this is even special and possible, which is that we're not moving all the data. We have a fancy hashing algorithm that does some, I won't say magic, but it does some cool stuff. And it lets you validate the data in place at scale. Where that really matters is not only in speed, but also if you're moving data in order to make these comparisons, you could potentially introduce a problem in data movement, and then suddenly you're chasing your tail. No one wants to be chasing their tail at work. And so I think that is just an important point, that even if you were to invest in that level of infrastructure to move all the data and do the comparisons in some third location or in one of the data warehouses, you would then be introducing a lot of other complexity. This is just one more view of the speed of comparison. So it's a little hard to read, but what we're comparing here is this download and compare speed, which is the one that takes a lot longer, versus a data diff where you're just comparing a checksum of hashes. So again, the exact performance is going to depend a lot on your context, but we're talking about an orders of magnitude improvement here. Finally, we took a highly scientific poll on LinkedIn, and we found that indeed, validating legacy versus new data is a big deal to people. We got some votes for the other sections, and I think all of this matters. I don't think anyone would say receiving stakeholder sign-off is easy, or migrating the data is easy, or identifying what to migrate is easy. But validating legacy versus new data, I just haven't seen anything out there that does that. So without further ado, I am going to pull up a recent diff. Bear with me here. I should have this URL stored, but here it is. So I'm going to walk through these results, and then I'll also run this diff. Let me just refresh this, because I did see it's a good thing that these Datafold updates are pushing, because we are shipping code, which I love to see. All right, so what we're comparing here is 1.2 million rows between Postgres and Snowflake. So you can see here, and I'll run this diff live, but just to kind of walk through the results, we're seeing 1.2 million rows in Postgres versus you can read it. There's a 2-row count difference. So that's the first finding. That's something that, of course, maybe you could do by just doing a count star and comparing. So, but it's important context. These are type changes, so we are still going to compare these columns, but we highlight, and this highlights some of the complexity of what we're doing. All these databases, it really is pretty difficult to track down all the different data types and how they match and how they don't match and what reasonably should or could be compared. We validate that the primary keys are not duplicate, but there are ones that are exclusive to one data set or the other. So you can see 2 primary keys exist, 2 rows with exclusive primary keys exist in Snowflake, and indeed 2 exclusive primary keys themselves. And finally, just like we saw in CI diffing, columns with differing values, we've got the user ID that has 4 differing values. So let's take a look at that. Actually, we'll start with the primary keys. So these are the 2 rows that exist in Snowflake, but not in Postgres. And then these are the value changes. So I'm only showing you the impacted column. I'll expand to show the others in a minute, but just so we can zoom in on this, this is the primary key that we set. And you can see what was null in Postgres has this value in Snowflake. So something's going on with the ETL or whatever data transfer process is being used to cause a value change. We also compare the schemas here. So you got a lot of that in the overview tab, but this can be pretty handy, especially if there are columns that are added or removed. And I think that is all I want to touch on in terms of the results. So let me go ahead and show you what it looks like to run one of these things. So I'm just going to click clone, and I'll select cross database. And I clicked clone just so I get all the same settings. But you can, of course, run a new diff from scratch. I should highlight and emphasize this can also be triggered from our REST API, from our diff scheduler, and yeah, those are the three ways: UI, API, and diff scheduler. So it really just depends on your workflow. I think there are definitely teams that have scheduled diffing, but they also have API diffs kicked off in Airflow, and they also drop into the UI and run one manually from time to time. You can add a filter here that is just a simple where clause, essentially. If you did have column names that did not match, so you might have like org ID to org ID. That's something that comes up from time to time, so that can be handled using this column pair. Primary key here, and then I'll click next. And I'm just going to leave all those selected. Then I'll click run. All right. So no one likes to give a live demo, but we're doing it. And this handy progress bar gives me confidence that we are indeed doing it. And here we have it. So same results because I ran the same diff, but hopefully this gives you, a little tingly feeling that this is actually happening, that this is something you could hook up to your legacy and new database and say, I can say for sure, I can assure my stakeholders and myself that this data matches, or if it doesn't, I know exactly why and exactly in what ways. I think that is what I was planning to cover today. So definitely, I will stick around for any questions that you might have, that you might be able to drop in the chat. I know Sung's been in the chat, but I'm excited to see what's been going on in there. And so if there's anything I can answer live, I will in just a moment. You've also got my email there and a QR code to book a meeting if you want to chat about any of this in more detail. And I'll go back to this in a minute so you have it up on the screen, but I did also just want to share a couple of our micro case studies right here. So, for companies that are in more the finance space, definitely take a look at what Rocket Money has to say. They used Datafold to pass an audit and to kind of continually validate to their internal and external stakeholders that their data is reliable and stable. And then Fair is one of our customers that use Datafold to get through and successfully complete a large migration. So we have a number of other case studies on our website. I just wanted to highlight those two. And that is pretty much a wrap for me, at least in terms of what I had written. So yeah, thank you again for joining. And looks like there's a lot in the chat. So I think I might ask Sung if you're there to hop on and maybe help walk through some of what it would make sense to cover live.
Yeah. Thanks, Leo. You did a great job. I think overall we cover most of the questions. We had a fun, charming moment when someone asked, "Hey, how exactly does lineage work?" And we both answered with the same answer. And so that was a chef's kiss.
Love it.
Chef's kiss. So I'm a happy camper. But other than that,
Well,
I think.
I
Sorry.
like that. I was just going to say I like the multimodal response.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. And I guess, just, thematically, it sounds like, people are generally resonating. Thank you again, Mate, Sean, and John for, I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but it does, for being so active in the chat. You've really made it so engaging. And so, the rest of this time is really to be freeform jazz, really to answer your questions live. If you're not comfortable going on the mic, totally understandable. Feel free to keep posting in the chat and we'll answer live now, as that'll be more congruent to how we want to spend the rest of this time. And so, yeah, I'll give it a pause. Looks like Mate, you're typing. Anyone else, feel free to get typing and we'll take it from there. Nice. I guess maybe I'll ask a pointed question. What resonated the most in Leo's demo for you folks today? Okay, data compare. Cool. Nice. Yep. Just the core mechanic of just like, hey, your source, here's target, no guessing games. Here's the diff. Very cool.
I think Sung, you mentioned this maybe live, but I do want to draw everyone's attention to the link on the screen right now, but also you can just click the one that Sung dropped in the chat. All of these migrations are going to be different, and you're going to have a unique tech stack, and we'll be able to get more specific in terms of saying how we can help and how these tooling will apply to your exact use case. Efficiency rate of the SQL conversion tool, that's a great question, Mate. I don't have that, so we'll have to get back to you. It's always been like very fast when I've used it, and we haven't heard anyone saying, this is getting laggy, but launched this relatively recently, so we should definitely get some benchmarks out there for you to see. All right. Well, if anyone else, okay, so yeah, on case by case can be different for complex SQL. For example, existing tools struggling with Oracle pivots to Snowflake pivots. Oh, well, that's a good tip. I don't know that I've personally tried to run that translation. So I think that I'd love to get you a chance to just try it out for yourself. Because we could come up with an example, but it's going to be most informative just to sort of see how it works in your use case. But yeah, that's a good tip that might be more challenging, and so we'll take a look at that.
Yeah. Honestly, seeing is believing, Mate. And so if you want to like hop on a trial with us, happy to have, that conversation with you and get your hands dirty with Datafold.
Awesome. Okay, well, I think then I think we can probably wrap up. So thank you all for joining, and really appreciate all your time. Thanks for bearing with me while I found my voice at the beginning. I was like, I don't know what to do about this for a minute, but really glad that this was hopefully a productive session for you all, and hope to continue the conversation. So that's all from me. Thank you, and have a good one.
Great job again, Leo. That was